So, I decided to make a quick video, and it's now 12 minutes past 3 in the morning, because I couldn't face the idea of going to bed without correcting the entire universe. In this particular case, how to fix democracy. Or, to put it another way, why fix something that isn't broken? The fact is that democracy has never yet existed, and I intend to prove why. With one simple example. In, I think it was 2016, a certain Mr. David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
As a quick aside, I will just explain that because Spanish people tend to refer to the place I'm from as England, I kind of got out of the habit of saying Britain. And then also, as an expat, I started to realise how calling it Britain is a kind of colonialist thing to do.
And I don't like any films with the guys in red coats being the bad guys. Oh yeah, so anyway, how am I going to fix democracy? It's really simple, and it applies in the following possible locations: the United Kingdom, the United States of America, and Spain, these being the three countries I know the most about. Britain, for having been planted there. Spain, for having welcomed me into flower. And the United States for haunting my every waking moment. Thank you, America. None of those aforementioned countries are democracies. And the reason is simple, because in all of those places, only a certain amount of people get to vote. And the irony of the concept of democracy is that it would only ever actually be a democracy if everybody voted. And that requires everybody to be obliged to vote. But anyway, why democracy has never yet been achieved. A nation consists of every living, waking, breathing, reproducing, and most importantly, tax-paying member of the breathing class. Maybe the last is the most important, because you don't become a taxpayer until you're old enough to be recognised as an adult. And that's the same time that you get to vote. But what would happen if everybody got to vote, including children? Kids at school go to class, the teacher says, okay everybody, today's votey day. You've all got your pieces of paper and your wax crayons. Scribble in the box next to the picture of the person you like the look of most, or the one that gives you the least nightmares. And the kids scribble away, their votes are collated, put in the back of a van and dropped off. But yes, of course, exact number of people who don't get to vote is different in each of these different 3 examples. But for example, in the United States, you can't vote if you're in prison. In Britain, you can't vote if you're a lord. I don't actually know who doesn't have the right to vote in Spain. Maybe I'll look into that one for you. But I think, unless I'm very much mistaken, at 18, you have the right to vote. Of course, now, as an expat who's been out of this country for more than 15 years, I've lost the right to vote in the next UK general election. But I also can't vote in the Spanish elections because I'm not a Spanish national. So that leaves me stateless in the eyes of a vote. But yeah, so if a democracy were to truly happen, then maybe you could say that anybody that was incapable of casting a vote, and the method of casting can be adapted to the situation as well. As I say, children with colouring pad and wax crayons, babies who are incapable of holding a crayon can choose to delegate their vote to their mother or other representative who can put a tick next to a box that says, I am the legal representative of this person. Anyway, so everybody has to vote. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, everybody's vote has to fucking count. Is that really so fucking difficult to bake into a system? No, it isn't. But it's never been done. And the way you do it is, everybody's fucking vote counts. Boom. It's amazing. Now you could say, oh, that's not fair. A gentleman with 7 children can persuade them all to vote the same way and he'll effectively have 7 votes of his own. Bollocks. Everybody's influenced in what they vote by somebody or some entity. Whether it's the TV channel that you select, the parent that you have whispering politics down your ear, your lover. Everybody has to say. So everybody should have a vote. Yeah, that's it. Everybody gets a vote. Boom. But what happens is, at the end, the party with the most votes gets to lead the country. Whether that's the president in an individual election or prime minister. But then that means that you've got to have a government made up of one or more parties and an opposition. And the opposition can be played in different ways, but usually its function is to slow down the passing of laws. The problem with this kind of broken democracy that we've got everywhere that thinks that they're democratic countries is,
what happens after everybody's voted?
After the election, you get a government which is at least 50% of the time not the one you voted for. And in the case of the American system, that 2-party system doesn't even need coalitions. So it just swings from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And as is the case in the British system as well, Conservative to Labour, and about once every 30 years, the Social Democrats or Liberal Democrats or whatever they call it at the time either team up with Labour or with Conservatives in order to briefly sniff the glove before paling away into obscurity again. So my solution is this. Every representative is part of the government, and the government is made up of the total of all the votes. So, to use the current example, the Spanish government would be made up with a coalition of PSOE, PP, Podemos, Vox, Ciudadanos, the regional parties as well. To larger or smaller extent, they would still vote on issues together in blocks, and as is the case in the British system, they would use the party whip to make sure that everybody in the party votes the same way, which also to me is an example of why you haven't really got a democracy. Because do you think that your candidate believes exactly what their party believes on every single issue? Because to me, if they do, then that either means that they have no mind of their own and no free will, or that they're prepared to change their opinion on things depending on which way the wind blows. Neither of which would be great characteristics for world leaders. But then, in the true democracy, the government is made up of a split of all the different parties that received votes, proportional to the number of votes that they received, obviously. If at the end of the election I vote for Noam Chomsky, there you go. I vote for Noam Chomsky. He's quite surprised because he didn't even stand for election. But I just do it, you know. I say, yeah, I'd like to see what the world would be like with him as oh yeah, I said the world, I meant oh yeah, let's do this on a global level. Global democracy. So Noam Chomsky gets one vote from me. In a population of 7 billion, that isn't enough for him to take his seat as a representative. But yeah, so eventually you get to a point where there's a cut-off point. You can't have an infinite government. So if the government is fixed at, let's say that the country is divided into exactly 500 voting districts. They could be based on population size or density or geographical location or whatever else, but these kind of things have to be calculated in the most democratic way possible. But each area votes for a representative from a list provided, and the list is made up of everybody who wants to represent that region. And then the votes are divided out, and you say, okay, so at the end of this voting process for the city of Vigo, for example, the city of Vigo, we are sending 3 3 PSOE candidates, 3 PP candidates, 2 Podemos, etc., etc. I suppose if it's on a city scale, then it's just the one candidate. So the person who gets the most votes for that. Wait a minute. No, I've already broken the system. So back to the question at hand. Democracy. Everybody votes. But that's the point. Everybody where? Because you still have to have borders. Yeah, good question. I'd like to answer it right now. After this short swig. So, there's another part to this question, and it goes to demographics. How do you decide how many people get to vote on what size of government and so on? I think it depends if you still want to keep the concept of countries or not.
No countries. I think they believe that it's beautiful, and it is the ugliest morality that you could possibly conceive of.
Right, so let's redraw this whole picture. A nation has a government, and the government is made up of however many people you decide makes a perfect government. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you want 500 representatives for the whole country. I think more than 500 people in a room is too many, but I think in Britain it's 600 and something, divided into 2 rows, the government and the opposition, like that, you've seen it. But the Spanish and I think the American one is circular, like that, and so you fill the seats like the wedges of a pie. Quite hungry. But however you decide to divide up the picture, the point is that circular pie thing would be a better representation because of how it should be. But the British Parliament is the perfect visualisation of how it really is, that you've got a government and an opposition. So in my system, the government is made up of 500 politicians. I'm going to call them MPs. 500 MPs representing all the different districts that make up the country. Each one of those districts has had there's been a national election, right? Obviously. And the number of votes for whichever, I'm drawing on the table and you can't see the table. All the votes for each region are collated, and a winner or even a number of winners is selected to then go to be the representatives. Like how in the American system, the Electoral College has a certain number of this is the problem that the electoral system has shown in America, that the Electoral College gets to send a different number of representatives for different places, and it's not proportional to the number of people that were voting. So this skews the representation in favour of the Republicans. So in this democratically elected government, you've still got parties with different amounts, and the party with the majority, their leader would be the leader of the government, but their job would be a purely administrative one, to do the shaking of hands and the meeting of other leaders and so on. But then they form their government based on the number of representatives of each group below. So, let's say the top party gets 30% of the votes. And, 500 is too complicated. I'm going to do it with 100, right? There's 100 MPs. 30 of them are from the party that has the majority, the small majority. So that party needs to fill 3/10 of the ministerial positions. Then the second party got 20%, so they have to fill 2, etc., etc. So smaller parties don't get ministries, but then the ministries get to propose laws relevant to each ministry. And then those votes are put before the whole of the government, and each of those representatives has a region that they're connected to, that they're supposed to be representing. So if it's a contentious issue, regardless of their political persuasion, it's their prerogative to check the feeling and the mood of the region that they're representing. As much for political survival as anything else. Any member of the government can propose a law and then it's put to a vote, the same as even with a government and opposition. An opposition member can propose a law, and then it's up to the government to decide whether to make that open to a free vote or to follow party lines. But let's say that there's a contentious issue. War. What is it good for? We're going to use the example of war. Boom! There's a war brewing over the horizon. Your neighbouring country is in flames. Something must be done. The enemy is at the gates. They're going to invade you at any moment. The government rushes into session and they put the vote. Do we go to war? Everybody in the room votes, and their vote represents the feelings of their constituents. In times of war, that's exactly how you would expect it to play, even with a government and an opposition. But it doesn't have to, and no government is obliged by law or anything to open the vote up to the whole of the House, or chamber, or whatever you want to call it. But in the perfect democracy it would, and another way that a perfect democracy would work is that these representatives are constantly in contact with their constituency, and there's a kind of rolling referendum where they're constantly polling and checking with the people who voted for them mind that they represent a specific region, they represent that region. Whether that's a couple of neighbourhoods in a big city or a couple of cities in a lesser populated area. But yeah, there's like a rolling referendum that people, they're constantly proposing questions to the public and getting feedback on the mood of the nation. So you don't need polls for elections and things because you already know what people care about, and they're voting more for the individual that they think is going to represent their region best, rather than the party that is really just a voting bloc within a permanent government. One of the things that frightens the West the most is the way that China can have not only a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, but a 25-year plan, and I believe a 100-year plan as well. And bearing in mind that they've just celebrated the first 100 years of their current regime, it seems that removing the inconvenience of the so-called democracy of party politics has enabled them to have a government that is more long-term. They expect to be there long-term, so they need to make sure that they've got plans for what's going to happen in the long term. You might not agree with what their plans are, but maybe they don't agree with yours. But in the West, there's this constant tug of war, toing and froing. New government comes in and undoes all of the laws that were brought in by the previous government, and it's left to the corporations to rule the world, or at least the Western world. So it's kind of a question of national security, that each country needs to have the best working administration possible. I don't mean hardest working, I mean best functioning. The elections are completely fair because they're completely transparent. Every one person has a vote, so everybody's registered to vote, and everybody has to vote. There are multiple methods. You can use the app on your phone, you can call the number on your screen if you're watching it on TV. There's a coupon in your newspaper. Everybody gets a letter through the post that wants one. An email, whatever. So yeah, everybody gets to vote in the way that is most convenient to them, and the only people who don't vote are the dead. So this also has an effect of having a built-in census, because everybody that is registered as alive and breathing is expected to have registered a vote by the end of the election cycle. Those who aren't could be followed up by some kind of social services to check that they're okay, and so on. And then it means that the voting register is also a register of who's alive and in the country at that time. Of course, the logistics are more complicated for expats. Sorry. But maybe this perfect democracy would spread anyway, and it would lead to a global government that is representative of all the people of the world, with each region been able to send its candidates to not only have long-term plans for individual countries, but for the future of the whole planet, because we need to start thinking about pandemics and climate crisis and stuff, that maybe it might work better if countries weren't so separate from one another. Imagine there's no countries. It's easy if you can. It is easy. The easiest thing ever. And the most boring. But boring in these cases is good, because boring means peaceful. It's pretty difficult to vote for a war that nobody wants. It's pretty difficult to introduce a law that nobody wants. It's pretty easy to make sure that everybody is represented. And then, and only then, could anybody claim to have truly experienced a democratic process. Thank you. And good night. Well, alright. Thank you and good morning. It's 4:05 now. I think I might go to bed. Democracy.